Welcome, everybody. It's time once again for the next chapter with Charlie Hedges as he explores turning the page on his life and yours. Hey, Charlie.
Hey, Paul. Our discussion today is about one of my very favorite subjects, creativity. We will delve into the questions, are you a creative? And if you are, what might be a creative process that would look like for you? Our special guest today is author, speaker, and popular musician, Rich Kirkpatrick. Late last year, Rich published an incredibly useful book titled MINDBLOWN. It's all about unlocking your creative genius. And yikes, do we have a lot to talk about. Just a bit about Rich before we get going. Rich Kirkpatrick is a native of San Jose, California, and has worked as a church musician and ministry leader. He writes, consults, and speaks about the intersection of creativity, faith, and leadership. Rich also writes a blog, and his work has appeared on several prominent sites. With that, let's bring on our guest, Rich Kirkpatrick. Welcome to the next chapter with Charlie.
I'm glad to be here, Charlie.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you. I so enjoyed going through your book. As we stated offline, I read the first 3 chapters, and all I can say is, wow. I highlighted it on Kindle. I read it on Kindle, and I highlighted it, downloaded my highlights, and discovered I had 45 highlights in the first 60 pages. I've had to pare it down for our show. Otherwise, we'd have a day-long show. We have so much to talk about today, and so I'd like to get right into this concept that you wrote in the subtitle of your book of unlocking your creative genius. Let's begin with talking about what is creativity. You write, what we create serves others. I like that the creation is an endeavor of service to other people. Talk to me about what you mean about that.
Well, I think, creating for ourselves, in a sense, serves others even, in a way, because we, got to be healthy and take care of our self-care, we call that, right? So oftentimes they tell us creatives, what do you create for? But really, the main reason we create is why someone learns, a chef creates a new recipe. That's why a musician writes a new song. That's why, there's a new NFL play that's put out there to meet the offense of another team. So it has to serve people in some way, at least as far as what I've...
Yeah, I like that. And you also state, you did a lot of good analogies and understanding and summaries, and you put creativity in your mind is about usefulness and beauty. It's 2 legs on a creative...
It's the 2 legs we have to walk with.
Okay, the 2 legs we walk with. And he said a usefulness and beauty. Typically when we think of creativity, we think, and we're going to talk about the engineer and the artist later, so we will talk about different types of creativity. But we typically think of creativity as beauty, but you have so aptly and so convincingly demonstrated that creativity is also about usefulness, and that there is something, and you write, and when it comes to creativity, beauty matters because beauty changes hearts and minds. Now, that's both beautiful and useful, is it not?
It sure is. I think that really encapsulates what I meant by that. And one of the analogies in the book is this incredible pastry my wife discovered in an alley in Paris, in the Latin Quarter of Paris, that was unique in how they twisted the dough. And the fact that it's so beautiful, but we're hungry. We needed something to eat. And so creativity, something, I think those 2 things, the usefulness and beauty, it has to solve a human problem, also a human pain. Human problem, that's utility, that's the things, we need a parking structure built, for instance. But the human pain is, how is that parking structure going to look how's it going to keep humanity, the people who walk in that neighborhood? Those are things. And so when you marry those two, or let me say, when you bridge those two, when I think you really have true, great creative genius.
Yeah, I like that a real lot, because in my tradition, that suffering and pain are just the growing transformational process of being a human being. And the creative endeavors, both as I'll give away some of our talk in a bit, as engineers and artists. Engineers create to make life useful, although with engineers, I'm in love with architecture, modern and ancient architecture. I'm especially in love with bridges. Now, bridges are purely utility until you see the bridges that are made many places in the States, tons of places in Europe, and they are works of art. You know, I sit on one end of a bridge and just admire the bridge for its beauty, not for its utility, for its beauty. And yet, in that beauty, we cross large bodies of water.
I used to live in Northern California, in Redding, and I think it's Santiago, the architect, that has a bridge they built, and the local people were not happy. No, we can't spend money on this, millions of dollars on this bridge. Well, people now, years later, drive from all over to see this as an attraction to walk it. It's a walking bridge. I mean, it's not even as useful as you might need, but it doesn't touch the Sacramento River. So you know, it respects the beauty of this wonderful river that goes there. But, you know, the idea of beauty capturing people, it doesn't have to be divorced. I think oftentimes, you know, if you're a creative person in a corporate environment, very much, you know, getting things done and bottom line ROI, they've got to solve those problems, are what our culture really pushes. I think what the artist offers is, how do we put meaning in what we're doing? How do we stay human as we are solving problems? How do we address human pain?
That's a perfect question. How do we address human pain? Because you look at much of the art that is produced in the world, and some of it is purely beauty, and some of it is truly addressing pain, addressing those issues in our heart that are causing upheaval or questioning. And art, nothing like creativity, gets to the heart and soul of that and helps us change. I so agree with you. I'm interested in, there's a couple of other, a large subject that I want to talk about, but you write something that is very meaningful to me personally. And, you know, I wrote it, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, you know, common trite phrase, but it really is. What is beautiful to me is beautiful. And you write, people find their own meaning in your work. It almost doesn't matter what you intended. What you intended is good for you. It satisfies your need. It addresses the needs of many people in your audience. But there are those that find something you didn't even know you intended, yet the art expresses it. Harold Bloom, the art critic and literary critic, writes this, and tell me what you think. You don't read Shakespeare. Shakespeare reads you. And I think that is the way with pieces of art. Even a bridge. You don't see the bridge. The bridge sees you and identifies with a core part of your soul. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think there's this, the mystical part of this is that when we create specifically for our own vision, it really, but it's more specific, becomes more universal that way. So people feel seen in art. A bad breakup song, about the bad breakup, hopefully a good bad breakup song, however you say that. But we all need that. And maybe the author may not have been going through a breakup, but was just writing a fun song. And out of that, there was some joy in the creation. Human part of this, humanity that we have. When we create, we do both see ourselves, but we also see other people without even knowing it. And Picasso, who was the one I quoted there, I think, he says, people tell me in my art there's meaning, but I have never intended it. And there's a difference, though, between intention, and invention. And I think a lot of times you miss intention, overdo that sometimes, prescription, as opposed to invention, what is around me and who is around me.
But, I read that and I was considering, what if your intention is purely beauty? Just that I'm so in love with this, because I dabbled in painting for about a decade. I taught myself to paint, and it was all abstract art because I can't draw stick figures. And, some of it was, most of it was just your average stuff. But, occasionally, I have a handful of pieces that I'm kind of proud of. And they really were beauty, for the sake of beauty, just the composition of color and structure, It, to me, had very useful, that there was no useful intent. Is there such a thing as creating just for the joy of enjoying the beauty of the creator? As we had talked on the phone, I said, we have a creator that created butterflies and waterfalls, and we never even talk about that.
As a music performer, look at it kind of this way. It's torture. You got to drive to a show, slog your way around or an airport, and the equipment's all tested, and you've rehearsed and don't know the audience, and maybe your tech that you don't know is in the venue is not very friendly to you, but you finally get to that moment. You're able to do your thing, and you're stressed, and maybe you didn't eat the right food. Then after the show, you see the response, and all that effort, there's beauty. I think in that, I guess what I'm saying is I think the intention, all that's underneath it, but we can't really own that. We can own doing our work and creating. In that, I think we see those beautiful things happen. The intention, I guess, is that we want that to happen. We don't prescribe it. Don't prescribe to another person, this is going to move you this way necessarily. I mean, Hollywood actually does some of this pretty well, so I'm not 100% saying this as a law. It is true that something that is going to be transformational, what they call a religious experience, is going to be at a different category than that.
Tell me something. When you're a composer and you write lyrics. When you write lyrics, where is the line in you writing your lyrics between beauty and usefulness? That you have a message that you want to send to people, but you want to enliven their hearts. You want to make them embracing the message. Yet there's a usefulness. How do you manage if there are tensions? How do you manage those two aspects?
I call that basically the sandbox, this zone where you understand constraints. So as I compose, I have a group my daughter's a part of, and we are called the Beautiful Liturgy. We have certain rules. It has to be singable for a person who's not professional. In other words, we can't write notes. It's going to be beautiful. We sing this one note. So the lyric has to be something that the person that's singing with us, because it's a group singing kind of composition, is going to relate to the rule. So we're putting a box round, or we're sizing the canvas. So that's really, I think, in a strange way, a mystical activity, because to see what physics are, miracles happen, time, space. They have GPS locations, and they have time and dates to them. So because of that, that's why everything's in constant motion in time. We breathe in, we breathe out. So the idea of some kind of automated commodity that we're trying to capture is really, I think, futile. AI and all these other things we're facing, where they're not going to be able to duplicate is a sense of mystery. And they're going to be able to say, here's a time and space, and
right.
And, they're not going to be able to be the sunset.
As you so eloquently wrote in your book, that AI and our technical capacities lack imagination. That is something unique to human beings, is imagination. And that imagination must have a lot to do with both usefulness and beauty.
I think usefulness and beauty can be thought of in neuroscientists describe what imagination is and the activities that happen. You envision things. For instance, you're not just the networks of your brain that are engaged in imagination have both logical and emotional components to them. They have something that has both a sense of order and mathematics, for instance, and then, magic, images, things that are not easily described, like concepts. And so what we do as people, we're wired to do as people, is to bridge between those two things constantly, and we're at our best when we're, it's hard to be imaginative when you're hungry and have
Right.
food insecurity, or you're in war. All those energies are put to survival. They're not put to what we're talking about, creating that beauty that just lets us see even deeper behind what's going on in the universe.
I was just listening to a podcast this morning I don't know if you're familiar with Barry Weiss on her podcast, Honestly. She's very excellent. And she did a show of a writer who wrote right after Leonard Cohen had retired, and he'd retired late 60s. He said he wasn't going to do music anymore. And he's Jewish. And when the Yom Kippur War began in 1972, he decided he wanted to go, and not like a Bob Hope tour, he wanted to go sing to the people in the war. And he and just a couple other musicians, they would just drive their Jeeps right up to the battle lines, and they would sing, and they had Israeli singers that were singing Israeli sort of rah-rah fight songs. And Cohen would come up and do Suzanne, and it was before he wrote Hallelujah, but his sort of sorrowful songs, and the first thought was that wouldn't be good for the troops, yet the troops loved Leonard Cohen. They loved him going, they felt he was real. He went to the real parts of their soul rather than just the excitement of winning a war which they didn't know they were going to win. That was almost as difficult as the 19 Days War. And yet it was his heart. It was the heart of what the message that connected with so many people in battle. I was very impressed by that.
Well, this is why we need artists, because, our humanity's at stake.
That's it. That's a great way to put it. Our humanity is at stake.
It is, and that's a good example of really, where the idea of propaganda, for instance, is its intention is to, change hearts and minds, or at least, by using fear or tribalism or things that are very simple. But when you get to the heart, you cannot deny that kind of truth. When you have shared human pain and you're allowed into that space, you can be empathetic to other human beings, and you feel someone is doing that for you. Seen, like we said earlier, you're seen.
Yeah.
It's a transformative thing, and it's something why despots pick up all the creatives and they put them in jail, because they know
yes.
that it's going to destroy their game plan and their propaganda to have people who simply understand the human condition and are able to expose it honestly.
They are detained really quite regularly. I want to get into, we've talked about the creatives and the creative process, and we haven't talked about the creative process. You have a brilliant creative process that I want to talk about after a break. But before we do it, I think you make a distinction that is very helpful, because I know a lot of our listeners, everyone wants to think of creativity in the artistic form. You're painting, you're performing, you're writing, you're doing all of these things with your hands, primarily with beauty or expression in mind. But you bring up a really helpful idea, Rich, and you write, let me see, you have an observation that there are two types of creatives. You call them engineers and artists. Well, you refer to them as engineers and artists. You call them robots and wizards. In the book, engineers are the useful, artists are the beauty, but there's a crossover in between. Talk to me about engineers and artists, because that really helped me in understanding the creativity of all people, especially if you don't have skills at artist, you have skills at figuring stuff out.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's when I peeked into neuroscience, which I am not a scientist, but I just went down the rabbit hole, and I had to just learn more about this. The things that they say is, we really have the process is really, thing they've been able to observe in so many people that, they see what that is. But what's different is how we start our creativity. So the robot is like a scientist, where they have a process set up ahead of time, and that's how they start. The wizard is a guy kind of like me. You get up in the middle of the night with an idea and you start writing or whatever it is that you do. The thing is, both of these, the robot and the wizard, start journeys on different paths, but those paths eventually converge, because as human beings, we're all going to end up way we're wired, create. And scientist who is setting up an experiment is going to have discoveries, and so forth, and they need a lot of creativity. But it's going to take them a long time before they even get to a point of people even seeing it as creative.
Mm-hmm.
A song, it's a little different, there's so much. The people who invented insulin want it patented. They didn't want to own the patent on it. They wanted that to be free to everybody. There so much those scientists were artists. They wanted to create something and let everyone see the sunset. It's like trying to hide the sunset. So I think that's the thing that it does, is when it attacks the zero-sum mind of the dark side of our humanity, and it lets us see that 1 + 1 could be 3, 4.
What do you have to say? Because there are some of us that I probably lean a bit more to the artist, but there's a lot of the engineer in me, a lot of businesses I've created and strategies and tactics, but my soul lives in the artistic world. What about, you did a Venn diagram in your book of engineers and artists, and there's a tremendous overlap. What is the overlap between engineers and artists? And to help our engineers understand, you are just as creative as Picasso, but in a whole different form.
Well, growing up in San Jose, I was around the high-tech field. My mother, in fact, used to solder mainframe computers, and she was so proud of that stuff she had. So engineering, people, they call it elegant code when they're writing code.
Right, they do. I've heard that a lot. Explain that to me.
Beautiful. It's a beautiful set of code that's not just efficient, but it flows in a way, because coding is a language. It's a binary language, but it's a language. Those who know it are able to say, this is really cool. This one, it's beautiful. It doesn't just get the job done. It's elegant. It's at the highest peak of they would call creativity in the engineering kind of world. And so that, to me, is an example of where an engineer may find that side of beauty. It's not going to be the same thing as someone who paints watercolors, and you go to the Getty and you see the beautiful paintings there. You're not going to get that same feedback from it, because the user is going to have no idea that app that maybe helps their TV function, behind it has that quality to it. There's some beauty compared to someone else's TV that doesn't have that. And I get it's a certain humility and service and serving other people on that too. But both the engineer and the artist really are these two. It's convergent thought and divergent thought are two basically kind of brain networks.
Right.
So a little bit in the book on that. And
yeah, I read that.
Those brain networks, really some of us are, I'm the 20% of the population that would be the wizard, the person but right-brained. And so, I feel like I'm alone. The truth is I have to become the robot in order to get things done. So that's why I call bridging science and magic. So the more that we are able to travel to that other side, awkward side for us, is the engineer would be, robot going the wizard side. Navigating that bridge quickly, what scientists say their geniuses do. So the key to all that I thought I uncovered, I hope, is that's the key, is how do we do that? How do we help with habits, with our training our brain move that way? So it's being open-minded, those of us who are we're crazy, how about this idea? And people moan, in the meeting.
Yeah.
Say, Rich, oh no, not another idea.
Yeah.
I keep coming up with more, and, we don't even have beer in front of us, and it's coming. And then there's to sort the ideas. You got to sort the ideas. So we have one point we're exploding things, and the other side of the bridge we are sorting them and putting them into order and by value or whatever determining. But going back and forth, we continue this process like a sanding process.
Yeah.
It gets finer and finer. That's kind of the genius that's learning your genius, is figuring out how to do that. And people might be really both. There's a term called schizotype. You ever heard of that term, schizotype?
No, I have not.
Like, the schizotype is kind of like schizophrenic in the sense they can see and hear things that are as clear as a hallucination, but they know it's not real.
Right. Okay.
They're able then to reverse engineer what they're seeing. Like a Michelangelo, they suspect, was one of these. It's called a disorder because it really is difficult for these people to function in normal life, because they're the Einstein kind of people are so enamored with these visions, even though they know they're not real, it's just overwhelming to them. But the point is, it's really our ability to vacillate between those.
And you have 3 stages that you move in and out of, interweave and move in, and I want to spend the next half of our show on that. But before I do, I just want to mention. Do you remember? I think it's Russell Crowe, the Russell Crowe film, A Beautiful Mind, where he is literally insane, but he's brilliant. Do you know which movie I'm talking about?
Yes.
Now, in that film, it made me think of. I wish I knew a lot of physicists. I know a very small handful of physicists, and I have read about physicists, and every one of them, when you talk about elegant coding, every single one of them, like Einstein, when they see the universe in its unity and in its oneness and its beauty, they're not astounded so much, it seems to me, by the math as they are the beauty of the whole thing, the beauty of the creation. That this is fabulous, and they're struck with awe. Do you find that as well?
I think so. I think this is why some of those folks went through as much schooling and rigor studying to get to where they are. I worked with a guy who was PhD from MIT in chemical engineering. He was a lay preacher, and I worked with him. Certified scientist, brilliant. He was one of the most passionate persons I think I've ever worked with. Dr. Porter was just an incredible individual. Who, he would give these lectures on, gluons, and would explain how they give us a picture of God, the supreme being. And it was just fascinating to me to see how people who are that smart, but also intelligent, meaning they have the capacity to learn all these things. A lot of us may not. Definitely see that. So that's why the robot may take longer to get to that certain point as far as the technical side of it. But I think so. I think
that's very cool.
They do see that.
Okay, you know what I want to do? I want to take a break, and then when we come back, we're going to get into dreaming sandboxes and stories, okay?
Okay.
Hi there, this is Charlie Hedges, and you're listening to The Next Chapter with Charlie, and I am doing a podcast that I'm very excited about with Rich Kirkpatrick. We're talking about unlocking your creative genius, and we've talked about what it takes to be creative and how all of us have aspects of creativity within us, and Rich has helped us identify what some people would think they're not creative and the fact that they really are. But what Rich has presented is a model of 3, and I'm calling them interweaving stages of the creative process. Technically, it's discover, develop, and deliver. He has titled it The Dream, The Sandbox, and The Story. And maybe, you know, I want to try to keep this as a bit brief because it could be the rest of the podcast. But maybe as you talk about the dream, the sandbox, and the story, you could give me an illustration of how you use that in one of your songs.
Okay, that's a great idea. So basically, in these 3 iterations, you know, these are all iterative kind of way you create. You know, you get an idea. So I need to write a song that's a love song. So I have some parameters, or at least I have an idea of an experience, let's say, of my wife and a memory. I want to capture that in a song. So that kind of just gives me this inspiration, and with music notes and whatever, I discover the idea is. Then after the dreaming, I end up in a sandbox. I end up at a place where I need to develop it. So
has the dream been developed at this point? I mean, what makes up the dream at this point?
The dream is really generation of ideas. So could be, what is the problem? You know, you're generating ideas. Okay, so you start with love song, then you, okay, there's 15 memories I have that really inspire me. That, oh wow, you know, 15 sunsets that are snapshots, whatever the inspiration is that you have, and these create ever expanding ideas, and you get to a certain saturation where then you have to, or to finish a song, you have to kind of sit down and develop it. So you take that transition point from I'm in this divergent thought, the dream we talked about, you know, the person imagining, you know, you're really being the wizard at that point. Now I'm kind of switching, I'm kind of half wizard and I'm kind of half robot now because I'm in this development. And so there, I'm still kind of having sort of an open mind, but I'm also quickly going to try to throw this song idea on tape or on the piano, whatever it is I'm doing, and test some lyrics out, and so I'm kind of developing some, throwing some away in crumpled paper. You know, imagine my little studio there, just throwing it away, and then I've constructed, you know, a rough draft of the song.
Let me ask this, just because you mentioned something that I think is curious for me. Is there a more common place for you to begin, lyrics or melody?
Not really. I mean, honestly, there's times where the lyrics they're there. They happen very quickly, and then it becomes a point of what music will really, it deserves, you know, this lyric, or vice versa, you know. And sometimes, you know, there's this music that's inspired, and what lyric can then support this music?
Okay.
Really, it's not really prescriptive in that sense.
Okay.
Anything.
Okay.
Developing it, and you're throwing around ideas and keys and arrangements, and so you have this song, a rough of a song, and you may put it on a demo tape even, whatever. It's not ready to go out to the world, so now you have to get to this point of the story where you deliver things.
Okay, go a little bit more on the sandbox. Tell me a little bit more about the sandbox.
The sandbox, okay, you know, making prototypes essentially is your goal. Your goal is to see, before you invest in going far and putting permanent ink on something, or final actual colors you're going to use for your manuscript. This is kind of like when I went to the Metropolitan Art Museum in New York, and they had a wonderful exhibit of Van Gogh and his trees and how iterations of it. Every brushstroke was kind of...
And tiny brushstrokes. That's what I love about Van Gogh, the tiny brushstrokes.
None of them were random. None of them are just, he didn't just first eye and say, I'm going to dot something there. These are, you see in the plan. So that's kind of, he would have been in his sandbox there, just trying these things out, and maybe even do some paint strokes on some canvas that he might throw away. And people don't know this about artists. They do so much in developing their work. that way. Music, it may be, I'm going to try to have a friend come over who's a drummer, and he's going to give me all these different beats that I didn't even think of before to develop that song. So that demo could just be something that, has 4 different versions, maybe even, of the song, 5 different versions of the song. And all of that is to test that idea. Does that idea really work? I worked with 4 ideas. Even one of these songs might be song. It kind of is a testing ground, which it might also see ideas bad because we tried 5 versions and none of them seemed to work.
Okay.
So then they travel recursively on this journey between these 3 zones, backward to the idea generation, and then go back to get more material. You can develop something better than what you had. And that's kind of a frustrating thing about artists, say, when do I give up on an idea? You want to give up on it before you spend all your resources. But you want to, so you go back and forth. So developing the idea is partly also proving the idea in the sandbox.
Okay.
In the tech world, they use that, they call it the sandbox when you test software out before they put it online to the public.
Sure.
But it's kind of like that idea, too. It's like, I want to see how this runs. Say it's a customer service process. Do, friends and family day for the restaurant. You do a prototype, you do pop-ups, you do things. Very much designer will move a sofa 50 times. You're developing what the idea is before you decide this is going to be delivered.
Okay.
And then you get to a point where, okay, now I need to go to the story part of it and deliver this idea. And story, I kind of use the short story structure because most of us know what that is. You have a setting and have a plot, you have a conflict and a resolution and characters in it, 5 basic components. So you ask questions about what you're doing. And it's in a narrative kind of format, like, who am I? This song I'm writing, it's not really me. It's a good song even. I'm going to sell this to so-and-so to sing because it's really, maybe it fits their story. Mm-hmm. Or the audience for it is not what I thought. I'm going to have to put it in the drawer and, because the audience I need to reach is not going to reach. And so or here's what I need to do to refine that song so that it reaches an audience. So that's what you do in that point is it ready? You can start constructing things. Get your producer in line with tracking everything down, and so your mastered product that's sent out to distribution. All of that, the business side of that's part of it, but also the human side of it being, your branding or your own identity is in there. You may find out this is a great song, and maybe no one will ever do it, so start over.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what happens. How many paintings and songs and et cetera have never seen the light of day? How many business plans are still in drawers?
Thank God.
Here's the thing, Charlie. Creativity is a process, not a product.
Perfect. And with that, I want to I want to talk about a process that, you show that you're creative when you write about the process of limitations on creativity, because I've read a handful of things on creativity, and a lot of times limitations are not even mentioned. I know. Did you read Rick Rubin's book, The Creative Act?
I've seen excerpts from it. It's on my list to read.
Yeah, it's worthy. It's probably, in my mind, the best thing on creativity I've ever read. It's really good. But he talks a lot about limitations, and you write the following. You quote You quote Orson Welles: "The enemy of art is the absence of limitations." And then you write, "Limitations don't limit creativity, they channel creative genius." And then you write, "There is nothing more restricting than creating without deadlines. Time is both an enemy and a friend." I like those last two, but I like the one where limitations don't limit creativity, they channel creative genius. It's like Jocko Willis's book, that Discipline is Freedom. That once you understand there is a sandbox that, we can color outside the box, those of us who are the artistic type. But at some point, if we live outside the box, we're not talking to anybody. We're just talking to ourselves. Tell me about creativity and limitations.
To me, one of the stories I share in the book is this very successful businessman raised his hand after I was sharing this 3-step process, and which I thought all you creatives didn't want any limitations or boundaries. I said, well, that's what we want you to think. We want a business like this. And, but the truth is we panic, and I call it the blank canvas panic attack.
Yeah. It's a blank page for the writer.
And so that's already about enough. But imagine that you don't even know if it's a page or a canvas yet. We're supposed to create. And that's really disempowering fact. And I had one situation where I had a leader never want to really give me a budget ever. And he'd say, well, you didn't spend enough that time. So, well, okay. So I was as creative as I could be with that. But it's really channeling who you are, basically, what creativity is, in my opinion, is a process of just can't control. But we have to live in physics, and you can look at that as problem or not, and it comes out to this idea of Kairos and Chronos time. But we need to understand both of those concepts. We need to go into the flow of we're not counting things. We also need to realize there is a clock, and it will cost something to spend X amount of time on something. So it is how we find our freedom. It's just like a toddler who's throwing tantrums needs to be brought into order to feel confident enough that they're safe. And in the same way, our vulnerable side we create that we hope to come out needs to understand those boundaries so that we're not crushed as we hopefully reveal the deepest part of our human spirit.
Yeah, and I've read creatives also say that one of the most essential parts of creativity is not what you add, but what you take away. That to leave the kernels, to leave the best without getting rid of the superfluous stuff that we can tend to write or paint or construct, whatever we do. The simpler the better, and I think limitations, I like that they channel the creative genius. If you don't channel your genius, it can become just far too sporadic and almost unintelligible.
Yeah, I think that's a great way of putting it. Editing, life, we need to edit ourselves, don't we? Can't handle all the information coming in to our brains at times, and we shut down because of that. We get depressed. So a lot of this that we do with creativity, I think, have a crossover into helping our general well-being. That understanding, what we can control and can't is, I think, not only paramount for learning how to be a more creative person, but just to live life better.
Very cool. Okay, I've got one last question before we close up, and it's out of thin air. It's not right in line with what we've been talking about, but it's something that has occurred to me so much. Solomon says, nothing new is created in heaven and earth, or something like that. But I wrote a piece one time that I titled "A Weaver and a Thief," and what I explained from that, I steal ideas from other people and then weave them into a tapestry of my own. And you write, stealing ideas is not plagiarism or ripping off someone. It is the unique way of reusing or expanding on what has already been done. I love that. Sometimes when I would think about writing a book, my wife would say, somebody's already written on that before. Well, sweetheart, somebody's already written on everything. There's nothing that hasn't been written on, but there is my take, given my personality, my history of experience, and my connectivity to the people that would be my audience. and that I can take those ideas, expand on them, put them into my vocabulary. As a matter of fact, let me conclude this little diatribe with, as I read the late medieval Christian mystics, they will quote other mystics and never give attribution. Never. Mm-hmm. And I've read one mystic being quoted verbatim in another mystic, and their view was, this is of God. This is not of the person. This is coming from the divine. So it doesn't matter what the person said. The divine revealed this. I'm just reiterating what the divine already revealed. Does that kind of mean anything to you?
I think it's fantastic. I think it definitely, originality, first of all, is overrated. There's an artist named Shaka Shah who I just met recently at an event in San Jose, and he says this: no one can outdo me in my own perspective. And so what happens is we get blocked as artists. First of all, we feel like we own stuff that we're creating with. It is from God. It is from the universe spewing to us is there. This is what we have to work with, which is, it's endless material to work with. We can reuse it and reuse it and reuse it and find deeper and deeper meanings as we go. Yet at the same time, what even makes it more special and mystical is the fact that, like that artist said, that we have our own perspective of it, our own space and time that we live in, which makes that come alive once again.
Yes.
It's very much like soil, which we go back to the soil, and people will eat the fruit that comes that way, the cycle of how life and death is on this planet, and how we all are part of this. Yeah, I didn't know that about mystics, but I think we look at too many things. Ownership. We don't own anything.
Yeah, copyright, all that stuff. I like the title A Weaver and a Thief. I think that's what creatives are. So let me close with this question. I've got a personal question for you. So, Rich, what is the next chapter of your creative journey?
The next chapter of my creative journey is to build this is a whole new thing for me that I'm in. It's basically be this creativity expert kind of role that I've jumped into, just trying to help people to keep creating, in other words. And so that's forming.
That's so needed. I so appreciate that. And keep me posted on what you're writing or doing so I can follow you, because I think you're headed on it. You've got a good handle on this. Rich Kirkpatrick, thank you so much for coming on to the show and with this enormously helpful information on creativity.
Absolutely, my pleasure, Charlie.
Okay. I want to thank all our listeners for tuning in to the next chapter with Charlie. And until next, this is Charlie Hedges signing off. Bye for now.